Every civilization that has ever lived beside the ocean has tried to explain it, and every one of them has come to the same conclusion. The sea is alive. Not alive the way a fish is alive or a coral is alive, but alive the way a person is alive, with moods, with desires, with a will of its own and a memory that stretches back to the beginning of time. The Greeks gave it a name and a trident. The Norse gave it a hall beneath the waves where the drowned were received as guests. The Yoruba gave it a mother's face and a mother's fury. The Inuit gave it a woman's grief and a woman's vengeance. The Polynesians gave it a father who breathed life into the first fish and whose body was the ocean itself. The Mesopotamians gave it a body, a vast, primordial body of salt water from whose dismembered flesh the sky and the earth were made. The Chinese gave it kings and palaces and a bureaucracy of dragons. Thousands of years apart, speaking languages that share no common root, living on coastlines separated by entire oceans, human beings looked at the same water and saw the same thing, something too powerful, too unpredictable, and too essential to be anything less than divine. This is not a coincidence, it is a pattern, and the pattern tells us something important about the relationship between human beings and the sea. A relationship that predates agriculture, predates cities, predates written language, and reaches back further than almost any other bond our species has with the natural world. The ocean fed us before we learned to farm. It carried us before we built roads. It shaped our coastlines, dictated our weather, drowned our dead, and delivered us to new continents. It was the first frontier and the last one, the source of food and the source of storms, the giver of life and the taker of it. No other element of the natural world occupies this kind of dual position in the human imagination, simultaneously nurturing and lethal, generous and indifferent, beautiful and terrifying. Fire can be contained, rivers can be dammed, mountains can be climbed and mapped and left behind. The ocean cannot be any of these things. It is too large, too deep, too old and too powerful, and the myths that every culture built around the sea are attempts to make sense of that power, to give it a face and a story and a set of rules that might, if followed carefully enough, keep the water from turning against you. Tonight, we are going to travel around the world and meet the gods, the spirits, and the monsters that human beings have placed in the ocean over the last 5,000 years of recorded mythology. We will begin in the oldest written mythologies, the Mesopotamian stories of a primordial ocean from whose body the universe was carved, and end in the Pacific, where the sea god Tangaroa still lives in the songs, the carvings, and the navigational traditions of the people who crossed the largest ocean on Earth in wooden canoes, guided only by the stars and the swells. Along the way, we will meet Poseidon and his trident, the Norse god of the deep, who brewed ale for the other gods, while his wife collected the drowned, the Yoruba mother of waters, whose worship survived the Middle Passage and flourished in the Americas, the Inuit woman whose severed fingers became the seals and whales that her people depended on, and the dragon kings of the Chinese and Japanese seas who ruled submarine palaces and controlled the rain. Every one of these stories is different. Every one of them is, in a deeper sense, the same. They are all attempts by human beings to negotiate with something that cannot be controlled, to personify something that cannot be understood, and to find meaning in a body of water that covers most of the earth and answers to no one. The ocean does not need our myths, but we have always needed them, because without a story, the sea is just water. And water that vast, that deep, and that indifferent to human life is a thing too terrifying to face without a name to call it by. The oldest ocean mythology that survives in written form comes from Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and the Euphrates in what is now Iraq. And it begins not with a god of the sea, but with the sea itself, imagined as a living being from whom everything else was made. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic, dates in its surviving form to roughly the 12th century before the Common Era. Though the stories it contains are almost certainly much older, rooted in Sumerian traditions that stretch back to the 3rd millennium. The text was discovered in the ruins of the library of Ashurbanipal at Nineveh in the 19th century, inscribed on 7 clay tablets in cuneiform script. And when scholars translated it, they found a creation story of extraordinary violence and beauty. At the center of the Enuma Elish is Tiamat, the primordial ocean, the salt water, the chaos that existed before the world took shape. Tiamat is not merely a goddess of the sea. She is the sea. Her body is the ocean, and the ocean is her body. And the story of creation is the story of what happened when the younger gods decided that chaos had to be given form. In the beginning, according to the Enuma Elish, there was only water. Tiamat, the salt water, mingled with Apsu, the fresh water, and from their union the first gods were born. These younger gods were noisy, restless, and disruptive, and their clamour disturbed Apsu, who plotted to destroy them. The god Ea killed Apsu first, and Tiamat, enraged by the murder of her consort, raised an army of monsters, serpents, dragons, scorpion men, and creatures of chaos, and prepared to annihilate the younger gods in retaliation. The gods were terrified. None of them dared to face Tiamat until the young storm god Marduk volunteered, on the condition that if he succeeded, he would be made king of the gods. The other gods agreed, and Marduk went to war against the primordial ocean. The battle between Marduk and Tiamat is one of the foundational scenes in world mythology, a combat between order and chaos, between the structured world of gods and men and the formless, undifferentiated power of the original sea. Marduk armed himself with the winds, with a net, with a bow and a mace and a bolt of lightning, and he rode out to meet Tiamat on the field of the primordial water. He caught the winds and drove them into Tiamat's open mouth, inflating her body until she could not close her jaws and could not move, and then he split her in two with his spear. From the upper half of her body, he made the sky. From the lower half, he made the earth. From her eyes flowed the Tigris and the Euphrates. From her tail, he fashioned the Milky Way. The world, in the Mesopotamian imagination, is built from the corpse of the ocean. Every river, every cloud, every star, a fragment of the original water, shaped by violence into the ordered cosmos that human beings inhabit. Tiamat matters because she establishes a template that recurs throughout world mythology. The ocean as the original substance, the primal chaos from which order must be extracted, usually by force. This is not a story about the sea as a place where fish live and ships sail. It is a story about the sea as the fundamental condition of existence, the default state of the universe before someone or something imposed structure on it. The ocean, in this telling, precedes the gods. It precedes the world. It is the thing that was here before anything else, and the thing that will still be here if everything else is taken away. Marduk defeated Tiamat and built the world from her body, but he did not destroy her. The sea remains. It is still there, beneath the sky that was made from her ribs, still moving, still vast, still carrying within it the memory of a time before there were gods to name it or men to sail on it. The Mesopotamians understood something that every subsequent maritime culture has understood as well. The ocean was here first, and it will be here last, and everything in between is borrowed time. The Greeks inherited their ocean from a tradition that stretched back through the Minoans and the Mycenaeans, island and coastal peoples for whom the sea was not a distant abstraction but an intimate daily presence, the source of their food, the highway for their trade, and the grave of their dead. By the time the mythology reached its classical form, the sea had been given a personality that anyone who has lived on the Mediterranean would recognize. Beautiful, volatile, generous one moment, and murderous the next, capable of profound calm and sudden, unpredictable rage. The Greeks called this personality Poseidon, and they feared him at least as much as they revered him. Poseidon was not the most powerful of the Olympian gods. That title belonged to his brother Zeus. But he was arguably the most dangerous, because his domain was the one that human beings could least afford to ignore and least hope to control. When the three brothers divided the cosmos after overthrowing their father Kronos, Zeus took the sky, Hades took the underworld, and Poseidon took the sea. The earth was shared among them, but the waters belonged to Poseidon alone, and his mood determined whether ships reached port or splintered on rocks, whether fishing nets came up full or empty, whether coastal cities prospered or were swallowed by tsunamis. He was also the god of earthquakes, Poseidon Enosigaios, the earth-shaker, a title that reflected the Greek understanding that the sea and the land were intimately connected, that the same force that raised the waves also split the ground, and that both expressions of that force were governed by the same volatile, easily offended personality. The Greeks did not worship Poseidon because they loved him. They worshipped him because they needed him to not kill them. And this transactional quality, give me safe passage and I will sacrifice a bull on your altar, runs through nearly every interaction between Poseidon and mortal sailors in Greek literature. The Odyssey is, among many other things, a 10-year lesson in the consequences of offending the god of the sea. Odysseus blinded Poseidon's son, the Cyclops Polyphemus, and Poseidon's response was not a single act of punishment, but a sustained, methodical campaign of torment, storms, shipwrecks, misdirections and delays that kept Odysseus wandering the Mediterranean for a decade while his wife waited and his kingdom deteriorated. Poseidon did not simply kill Odysseus. He could have. Instead, he prolonged the suffering, drawing it out over years, making Odysseus watch his companions die one by one, watch his ships break apart, watch every hope of homecoming dissolve into salt water and wreckage. The message was not subtle. The sea does not forgive. The sea does not forget. The sea has the patience to destroy you slowly over years, and it will do so without remorse if you give it reason. This is not the behavior of an impersonal force. It is the behavior of a personality, petty, proud, and capable of holding a grudge across an ocean and a decade. But the Greeks also knew a deeper, older ocean than Poseidon's, the ocean of Oceanus and his wife, Tethys, the Titans who personified the great river that the Greeks believed encircled the flat disk of the earth. Oceanus was not a storm god. He was not angry or jealous or vindictive. He was simply vast, a river without beginning or end, flowing around the edges of the known world, beyond which lay nothing that any mortal had seen and returned to describe. Oceanus represented the sea as boundary, as limit, as the edge of the map beyond which the rules of the known world ceased to apply. He was the water that separated the living from the dead, the familiar from the unknown, the Greek world from whatever lay beyond it. In Oceanus, we see a different kind of ocean mythology, not the sea as personality, but the sea as frontier. The water that says, this far and no farther. The Greeks honoured both versions, the angry god who sank your ship and the quiet, encircling river that defined the limits of everything you could ever know. The Norse lived with a colder, darker, more violent ocean than the Greeks, and their mythology reflected it. The North Sea and the North Atlantic are not the blue, sun-warmed waters of the Mediterranean. They are grey, freezing, storm-racked, and unforgiving. Waters where a capsized boat meant death in minutes, where fog could descend without warning and erase the horizon, where the winter darkness lasted for months and the sea merged with the sky in a featureless wall of cold, grey nothing. The Norse did not romanticize their ocean. They feared it with a specificity that suggests long and intimate experience with its worst moods, and the gods they placed in it reflect that fear with a clarity that is sometimes beautiful and sometimes genuinely disturbing. Aegir was the Norse god of the sea, though calling him a god is slightly misleading. He was a Jotun, a giant, older than the Aesir gods, and not quite one of them, tolerated and respected, but never fully trusted. His great hall lay beneath the waves, lit by luminous gold that glowed like fire. Some sources say it was the gold itself that served as the only light, giving the hall an eerie, flickering warmth that made the drowned guests forget they were dead. And he was famous for two things: brewing the finest ale in all the 9 realms and hosting feasts for the gods that were legendary for their extravagance and their danger, since the gods' behaviour at Aegir's table was not always civilized. Aegir was the sea in its generous mode, the provider of fish, the highway between lands, the host who gave abundantly to those who treated him with respect. But his wife, Ran, was something else entirely. Ran was the goddess of the drowned. She owned a great net, and she used it to catch sailors who fell from their ships or whose vessels broke apart in storms, dragging them beneath the surface to her hall, where they joined the company of the dead. The Norse believed that those who drowned at sea did not go to Valhalla, the hall of the heroic dead, but to Ran's hall instead, a fate that was not necessarily terrible, but that was permanent and beyond appeal. The pairing of Aegir and Ran captures something essential about the Norse relationship with the sea. It gives and it takes, often in the same moment, and the giving and the taking are not performed by the same hand. The sea that fills your nets with fish is the same sea that pulls your brother under the waves, but in the Norse imagination, these are two different wills, two different appetites, housed in the same water. Aegir brews ale and lights his hall with gold. Ran casts her net and collects the dead. They are married, and their 9 daughters are the waves themselves, each one named, each one a different kind of sea, from the gentle swell that rocks a ship to sleep, to the towering breaker that smashes it to driftwood. Beneath Aegir and Ran, coiled around the roots of the world, lay something far older and far more terrifying. Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent, the world-encircling sea monster so vast that it held its own tail in its mouth, and so powerful that its thrashing caused the tides. Jörmungandr was the child of Loki, the trickster god, and it had been cast into the sea by Odin, who feared what it would become. It grew until it encircled the entire world, lying on the ocean floor, waiting. At Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, the end of the world, Jörmungandr would rise from the sea and fight Thor, the thunder god, in a battle that would kill them both and flood the earth. The Midgard serpent is the Norse answer to the question that every maritime culture eventually asks: what is the worst thing the ocean could do? The Norse answer was total, world-ending destruction, the sea rising up, casting off the shape the gods had imposed on it, and reclaiming the land in a final, catastrophic flood. It is a vision of the ocean not as a servant of the gods, but as their destroyer, patient and coiled and waiting in the cold water for the day it would be released. Far to the north, beyond the reach of the Norse and the Greeks, in the frozen waters of the Arctic, the Inuit told a story about the ocean that is unlike any other in world mythology. A story rooted not in cosmic warfare or divine politics, but in human cruelty, human grief, and the terrible intimacy between a people and the sea that fed them. The story is about a woman named Sedna, and it is one of the most powerful and psychologically complex origin myths in any culture. There are many versions. The Inuit oral tradition is vast, and the story varies from community to community across the Arctic. But the core elements are remarkably consistent, and they center on an act of betrayal that transforms a human woman into the mother of everything that lives in the sea. In the most widely told version, Sedna is a young woman who refuses to marry, or who is tricked into marrying a spirit who takes the form of a bird, a fulmar in some tellings, or a petrel, or a mysterious stranger who arrives by kayak and reveals his true nature only after the marriage. Her father, attempting to rescue her, or in some versions, to appease the angry spirit whose bride he is stealing back, takes her out to sea in his kayak. A storm rises, sent by the bird spirit, or by the sea itself, or by forces so old they have no name, and the father, terrified for his own life, throws Sedna overboard to lighten the boat and calm the water. She clings to the edge of the kayak, her fingers gripping the gunwale with the desperation of a woman who knows she has been betrayed by the one person who should have protected her, and her father, desperate, cuts off her fingers, one joint at a time. As each finger falls into the water, it transforms. The first joints become seals, the second joints become walruses, the third become whales. Sedna sinks to the bottom of the ocean, where she becomes a powerful spirit, the mother and mistress of all sea mammals, living in a house on the ocean floor with her severed fingers transformed into the animals that the Inuit depend on for survival. The brilliance of the Sedna myth is that it makes the ocean's abundance inseparable from suffering. The seals and whales that feed the Inuit are not gifts from a generous deity. They are the severed flesh of a woman who was betrayed by her own father, and they carry within them the memory of that betrayal. Sedna is not benevolent. She is powerful, and she is angry. And when the Inuit violate her taboos, when they mistreat the animals she created from her own body, when they waste what the sea provides, when they fail to observe the rituals that maintain the relationship between human beings and the ocean, she withholds the animals, tangling them in her long hair at the bottom of the sea, and the people starve. The only remedy is for the community's shaman to undertake a spirit journey to the bottom of the ocean, comb the tangles from Sedna's hair, soothe her anger, and persuade her to release the animals again. This is a mythology built on reciprocity and consequence. The sea provides, but only if you hold up your end of the bargain. The animals are not yours to take without acknowledgement. They are pieces of a living being who remembers what was done to her and who will punish carelessness and ingratitude by withdrawing the food supply entirely. For a people living in one of the harshest environments on Earth, where starvation was never more than a few bad hunting seasons away, this was not an abstract theological concept. It was a survival strategy encoded in narrative form, a story that enforced ecological discipline by making the consequences of waste and disrespect immediate, personal, and divine. Sedna is the ocean as judge, as mother, as victim, and as enforcer all at once, and her story has survived for thousands of years because it tells a truth that no Arctic community could afford to forget. The sea owes you nothing. Everything it gives, it can take back. On the other side of the world, along the coasts and rivers of West Africa, the Yoruba people of what is now Nigeria developed a mythology of water that would eventually become one of the most widely practiced spiritual traditions in the Western Hemisphere. Not through conquest or missionary work, but through the Middle Passage, the transatlantic slave trade that forcibly transported millions of West Africans to the Americas between the 16th and 19th centuries. The water goddess they carried with them was Yemoja. Yemoja in Yoruba, also known as Yemanja, Yemanja, or La Sirène, depending on where her worship took root. And her story is a testament to the resilience of a spiritual tradition that survived one of the most violent dislocations in human history by adapting to every shore it reached. In the Yoruba tradition, Yemoja is an Orisha, a divine spirit, a manifestation of the supreme god Olodumare's power in the natural world. She is the mother of waters, the protector of women and children, the patron of fishermen and sailors, the guardian of pregnant women and newborns, and the spirit of the ocean and its rivers. Her domain is the boundary between salt water and fresh, the place where rivers meet the sea, and her personality reflects this liminality. She is nurturing and fierce, gentle and overwhelming, the calm river that sustains the village and the storm surge that reshapes the coast. She can be tender, cradling the sick, easing the pain of childbirth, calming the fears of children, and she can be terrifying, rising in flood and tempest when her boundaries are violated or her children are threatened. She is often depicted as a beautiful woman rising from the waves, and her colours are blue and white, the colours of the sea and its foam. In Nigeria, her worship was centred on the Ogun River, and her annual festival drew thousands upon thousands of devotees who came to the riverbank to offer gifts, sing her praise songs, and ask for her blessing and her protection. When the slave trade carried millions of Yoruba and other West African peoples across the Atlantic, Yemoja crossed the ocean with them, not in any physical form, but in the memories, the songs, the prayers, and the ritual knowledge of the people who were stolen from her shores. In Brazil, she became Iemanjá, one of the central figures of Candomblé, the Afro-Brazilian spiritual tradition that preserved and adapted Yoruba religious practices under the pressures of enslavement and Catholic colonial rule. Every year on February 2nd, millions of Brazilians gather on the beaches of Salvador, Rio de Janeiro, and other coastal cities to celebrate Iemanjá's festival, launching small boats filled with flowers, perfume, mirrors, and other offerings into the surf and asking the Mother of the Sea for protection, fertility, and safe passage through the year ahead. In Cuba, she merged with the Catholic Virgin of Regla and became a central figure in Santeria. In Haiti, she became La Sirène, the mermaid spirit of Vodou, associated with the moon, the tides, and the mysteries of the deep. The survival and transformation of Yemoja across the Atlantic is one of the most remarkable stories in the history of religion. A goddess of the West African coast, torn from her homeland by the very ocean she personified, was carried in the minds of enslaved people across thousands of miles of water, and she not only survived the crossing, but flourished on the other side, adapting to new languages, new landscapes, and new forms of oppression, without losing her essential identity. She is still the Mother of Waters. She is still the protector of women and children. She is still the spirit who lives in the place where the river meets the sea. But she is also something more. She is proof that spiritual traditions, like the ocean itself, are harder to destroy than they appear, and that a mythology rooted in water can cross any water and take root on any shore. The Chinese and Japanese mythological traditions imagined the ocean not as a single divine personality, but as a kingdom, a vast, structured hierarchical realm beneath the waves, governed by dragon kings who controlled the waters, the weather, and the fates of everyone who lived near the coast. The dragon, in East Asian mythology, is not the fire-breathing monster of European folklore. It is a water creature, a sinuous, serpentine being associated with rivers, rain, clouds, oceans, and the life-giving power of water in all its forms. The dragons of the sea are the most powerful of all, and their palaces, built of crystal and coral on the ocean floor, are among the most elaborately imagined supernatural settings in world literature. In Chinese mythology, the ocean is divided into 4 seas: east, west, north, and south. And each sea is ruled by a dragon king, the Long Wang, who answers ultimately to the Jade Emperor, the supreme deity of the Chinese celestial bureaucracy. The Dragon King of the East Sea, Ao Guang, is the most prominent in Chinese literature and folklore, appearing in numerous stories, operas, and folk tales as a figure of immense power and occasionally comical, bureaucratic fussiness. His palace is described as a dazzling underwater court, filled with treasures, staffed by fish and crustacean attendants in humanoid form, and governed by the same elaborate protocols and hierarchies that characterize the Chinese imperial court on land. The Dragon Kings are responsible for controlling rainfall, And when drought struck a region, the local population would petition the Dragon King for rain through temple offerings, processions, and elaborate rituals. If the rain did not come, the Dragon King could be threatened, scolded, or even symbolically punished. His statue dragged from its temple and left in the sun to bake. A theological negotiation conducted through the language of bureaucratic complaint. The most famous Dragon King story in Chinese literature is the tale of Ao Guang and the young deity Nezha, from the 16th century novel Fengshen Yanyi. Nezha, a child god of extraordinary power and terrible temper, plays in the sea and kills Ao Guang's son in a fight. The Dragon King demands justice, Nezha defies him, and the confrontation escalates into a cosmic conflict that eventually draws in the entire celestial hierarchy. The story is beloved in Chinese culture, adapted into operas, films, and animated series, and it captures a dynamic that runs through much of East Asian ocean mythology. The sea is powerful, but it is not all-powerful. The Dragon Kings can be bargained with, challenged, outwitted, and even humiliated by mortals or gods who are brave or reckless enough to try. Japanese mythology absorbed and transformed the Chinese Dragon King tradition, producing its own distinctive vision of the undersea realm. The Ryujin, or dragon god of the sea, rules a magnificent palace called Ryugu-jo, the Dragon Palace, located at the bottom of the ocean. The most famous Japanese story involving the Dragon Palace is the tale of Urashima Taro, a fisherman who rescues a turtle and is rewarded with a visit to Ryugu-jo, where he is entertained by the Dragon King's daughter, Otohime, in a palace of unimaginable beauty. He stays for what feels like a few days, but when he returns to the surface, he discovers that 300 years have passed. Everyone he knew is dead. The village he left is unrecognizable. He opens a forbidden box that Otohime gave him, and he ages 3 centuries in an instant, crumbling to dust. It is a story about the seductive danger of the ocean's other world, a place where time moves differently, where beauty and pleasure dissolve the boundaries of mortal life, and where the price of admission is everything you have ever known. The sea in Japanese mythology is not merely powerful, it is enchanting, and its enchantment is the most dangerous thing about it. We end our journey where the ocean is largest and where the relationship between human beings and the sea has been most intimate, most sustained, and most consequential, the Pacific. The Polynesian peoples who settled the islands of the Central and Eastern Pacific over the course of roughly 3,000 years did not merely live beside the ocean. They lived in it. Their mythology, their identity, their daily existence, and their entire civilization were built on and inseparable from the sea. The ocean was not a barrier to be crossed. It was a homeland to be inhabited, a highway to be navigated, and a living presence to be respected with a specificity and a depth that no other culture on Earth has matched. At the center of this relationship stood Tangaroa, the god of the sea, one of the great Atua, the divine beings who shape the world and everything in it. Tangaroa appears across the breadth of Polynesia, from New Zealand to Hawaii to Rapa Nui. Though his name shifts from island to island, Tangaroa in New Zealand, Tagaloa in Samoa, Kanaloa in Hawaii, Ta'aroa in Tahiti, and his role in the creation story varies with each telling. In some traditions, particularly in the Society Islands, Ta'aroa is the supreme creator god. existing alone in darkness inside a shell before breaking free and using the fragments of the shell to build the sky and the earth. In other traditions, Tangaroa is one of several children of Rangi and Papa, the Sky Father and the Earth Mother, who separated their parents to create the world of light, and who then took dominion over the sea and its creatures. In all traditions, Tangara is the father of fish and the lord of the ocean, and his relationship with human beings is one of mutual obligation. He provides the fish that sustain the people, and the people honour him through prayer, ritual, and the observance of tapu, the system of sacred prohibitions that governed every aspect of Polynesian life. What makes Tangaroa's mythology distinctive is its integration with practical knowledge. The Polynesian navigators, who crossed thousands of miles of open ocean using only the stars, the swells, and the flight paths of birds, were not operating in a secular space. The ocean they navigated was Tangaroa's body. The fish they caught were his children. The swells they read for navigational information were expressions of his will. The act of navigation was simultaneously a practical skill and a spiritual practice, and the master navigators who guided the great voyaging canoes across the Pacific were both technicians and priests, interpreting the physical signs of the ocean through a framework that made no distinction between the natural and the divine. A swell pattern was both a navigational cue and a message from the god. A school of fish was both a food source and a gift. The Polynesian relationship with the ocean was not a metaphor. It was a lived reality, enacted daily, in which every interaction with the sea was an interaction with the sacred. This integration of mythology and practice gave Polynesian ocean culture a resilience and a coherence that survived the immense disruptions of European contact and colonization. When missionaries and colonial administrators suppressed traditional religious practices across the Pacific in the 19th and 20th centuries, the knowledge of the ocean, the navigational techniques, the fishing methods, the understanding of currents and weather survived because it was too practically essential to abandon. And embedded within that practical knowledge, inseparable from it, were the stories and the values of Tangaroa's mythology. The idea that the ocean is alive, that it provides for those who respect it, that it punishes those who do not, and that every human being who sets foot in a canoe enters into a relationship with a power far older and far greater than themselves. The revival of traditional Polynesian navigation in the 20th century, particularly the voyage of the Hokulea, a reconstructed Hawaiian voyaging canoe that sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti in 1976 using only traditional methods, was as much a spiritual revival as a practical one, a reclaiming of Tangaroa's ocean from the maps and instruments of the Western world. We have travelled a long way tonight, from the saltwater body of Tiamat to the crystal palace of the Dragon Kings, from the trident of Poseidon to the severed fingers of Sedna, from the net of Ran to the blue and white waters of Yamoja, and finally to the living ocean of Tangaroa. Every one of these mythologies is different. They arise from different geographies, different climates, different histories, and different relationships with the sea. The Greek Mediterranean is not the North Atlantic. The Arctic Ocean is not the tropical Pacific. The rivers of West Africa are not the four seas of China. And yet, beneath the differences, the same handful of ideas recur with a consistency that is difficult to dismiss as coincidence. The first is that the ocean is older than the gods. In mythology after mythology, the sea exists before creation, before the sky, before the land, before the first divine being who will eventually shape the world. Tiamat is there before Marduk. Oceanus encircles the world before Zeus divides the cosmos. The primordial waters appear in Genesis, in Hindu cosmology, in the creation stories of dozens of cultures that had no contact with one another. The ocean is the default state of the universe. Land is the exception. Order is the exception. Everything begins in water, and the act of creation is the act of imposing form on a formlessness that the water embodies. The second is that the ocean gives and takes in the same motion. Every ocean mythology includes both abundance and destruction, provision and punishment, sustenance and death. Aegir brews ale and Ran collects the drowned. Yamoja protects and Yamoja overwhelms. Sedna's fingers become the seals that feed the Inuit, but Sedna herself withholds the animals when her rules are broken. Tangaroa provides the fish, but Tangaroa also sends the storms. The ocean is never simply generous and never simply cruel. It is both, simultaneously, and the myths insist on this duality because the sea itself insists on it. Any fisherman who has ever watched a calm morning turn into a killing squall understands this in a way that no landlocked philosopher ever could. The third idea is reciprocity. The conviction that the relationship between human beings and the sea is not passive, but transactional. You must give to receive. You must observe the taboos, make the offerings, sing the songs, comb the goddess's hair, petition the dragon king, sacrifice the bull on the altar. The sea is not a vending machine. It is a relationship, and relationships require maintenance. This idea that the ocean demands something in return for what it provides is the closest thing to a universal in ocean mythology, and it carries within it an ecological wisdom that the modern world has largely abandoned. The ancient Inuit who believed that Sedna would withhold the seals if they wasted what she gave them were practicing a form of resource management encoded in sacred narrative. The Polynesians who observed tapu around Tangaroa's waters were enforcing seasonal fishing restrictions through divine law. The myths were never merely stories. They were instructions for how to live with the sea without destroying the relationship that sustained you. We live in a world that has largely stopped telling these stories. The ocean is no longer a god or a goddess or a dragon king. It is a resource, a shipping lane, a dump, a source of protein and minerals and energy. We take from it without offering anything in return, and we have done so for long enough that the consequences are becoming visible. In acidifying waters, in collapsing fisheries, in coral reefs bleaching white and dying in plastic, accumulating in gyres the size of continents. The myths are not coming back, and perhaps they should not. They belong to the cultures that created them, and they carry meanings that cannot be transplanted. But the idea at their centre, the idea that the ocean is alive, that it remembers and that it will respond to how it is treated, is not a myth. It is a fact. And it is a fact that every civilization represented in tonight's journey understood, thousands of years before we had the science to prove them right. Every civilization that has ever looked at the sea has seen a face looking back. It was not always the same face. Sometimes it was angry, sometimes it was generous. Occasionally it was a mother or a monster, a god holding a trident, or a woman sinking beneath the waves with her fingers turning into seals. But the face was always there, because the ocean is too vast, powerful, and essential to be treated as a thing. It demanded to be treated as someone. We have given the ocean many names tonight: Tiamat, Poseidon, Aegir, Ran, Sedna, Yamoja, the Dragon Kings, Tangaroa. They are all gone now, or nearly gone, faded into literature and museum exhibits and the quiet devotions of the communities that still remember them. But the ocean they described is still here, still giving, taking, and moving with a will that looks, from the shore, very much like its own. The names and face may change, but the sea does not. Sleep well tonight. The ocean is still out there, and whatever you choose to call it, it is still listening, just as you have listened. Thank you.